So thanks very much for coming along to our Future Gov's fourth show and tell, but I think Camden have done a couple of extra show and tells on top of that, so I think it's about number 6 for them. We've done a lot in the last sprint, so quite a bit to share today and a couple of activities as we go through as well. For those who haven't come along before or don't know much about the project, Rich, do you want to give a bit of an overview of why we're here?
This project came off the back of the COVID-19 challenge, and there's always been a challenge with us. We've done some discovery work before COVID around barriers to engagement in planning and how we can better engage with residents and communities in planning. So this project then decided to build on that and try and look in particular about how we're shifting to digital in response to COVID. And we're trying to, in particular, encourage people who don't traditionally get involved with planning to participate and have their say, and also to try and understand sort of around how we can improve access to digital information, improve the data and make the whole thing more transparent for people. And there's 2 key strands to it. One is around trying to design a digital site notice, so an equivalent that can go online that can maybe communicate a lot better, and also encourage participation and more valuable participation to planning applications. But then also a digital engagement playbook, and that's a resource for local authorities to try and pool our knowledge of how we're sort of adapting to digital engagement, and give people ideas and resources to use to be able to go away and improve that. And
we're collecting photos of great site notices, and I think the best one went to Jono this sprint, which is that lovely photo on the right, which I'm sure we can all tell a lot about what's going on there. So what have we been up to the last 3 weeks? So from the site notice side of things, this sprint's been all about lots of testing actually for both streams. So for the site notice, we went out and tested with residents, which we'll share some insights with you soon. We then ran a synthesis session with the Camden team to work out what changes we wanted to make and next steps. We then iterated the designs based on that feedback and what we learned. And we've also started some conversations around data and feasibility to understand, so we can do 2 versions of the design, more of a future state one, which we'll go through today, and a current state one based on what's available right now. And on the Playbook side, we've developed an early version and MVP of the Playbook. We've tested that content structure and the types of resources that we'd be looking to capture to support local authority officers. And we tested that with 5 authorities. And then we did a synthesis to pull out the insights and what we learned from that as well. So Nora is going to share some reflections on how you found the testing.
I think the user testing was really, really interesting. And like user researchers generally, I think is such an important part in creating a successful product. And I don't think it needs to be like such a revolutionary thing like what we're doing now with the site notices or the engagement playbook. It could be using user searching, creating plan making documents like SPDs or others to help to basically create those documents that are easy to navigate by everyone. But obviously, that requires a lot of time and resources from local authorities, which we experienced as well in Camden when working on this. I actually had a previous encounter with user research when I was doing some user stories for a guidance that I've been working on home improvements. And from that, I think it was really just valuable to understand what are the priorities for residents and to adapt the approach in shaping the document to respond to this. And what we did now, it was quite different. I have never done this before. And yeah, I was a note taker. It was really interesting for me to see how different people have such different behaviors when they approach a website or a product of this kind. Also, how easy it is to make assumptions as a co-creator that that's how people are going to use it in a certain way, or they're going to read something specifically from the beginning or click on or certain things. So I think it's really, really valuable experience for me to meet and hear other professionals from different local authorities to just understand how this playbook will respond to the challenges for their local authorities when dealing with digital engagement with communities or particular groups within a community, which is quite different than London Borough, like Camden. And what I'm most excited about is that the users were quite happy to further contribute to the playbook, which is something that will be really good and will ensure continuity. But obviously, there are things that we need to think about in terms of updating information and monitoring, and while maintaining it open and transparent for everyone. So yeah, it was really, really good.
I was involved with some of the notice user testing, and I just reiterate everything that Nora said, really, about kind of how important it is and the kind of the valuable insights you get from it. And I think putting users at the center of what you're doing and getting them to drive the sort of the outputs and the product is really insightful, because it just shows you how many wrong assumptions we make about stuff. And the thing that really struck me with the notice one was around how poor we are at communicating planning information, and how we make so many assumptions about language that we think is clear, but and I'm not even talking about jargon, it's just the way that we apply it, and planning is just not often accessible to most people who don't know the planning system. So it was a real eye-opener, and it was a really useful exercise.
Hi everyone, so I'm Harriet. I'm a service designer working for FutureGov, so I was in charge of leading the user testing for the site notice. And what we learned a lot of things. We tested a lot of things. So coming into the testing, what we needed to prove were some of the assumptions we'd made around this digital site notice. So we were assuming that if we gave residents information about social and economic impacts of developments, that they would be more engaged with the information and with the process. We were also assuming that residents would want to know about the planning process. We were assuming that they would want to engage with development management in planning, as opposed to the policy and plan making. So obviously the site notice comes at a particular point in the development of a site, and we were testing whether this was actually something that residents cared about or wanted to engage with. And we also wanted to test that residents were able to provide meaningful feedback. So we tested with 7 users, and these were from a mix of backgrounds. We were targeting people that don't usually participate in planning. So we tested with 3 younger people under 30. 4 out of 7, so the majority didn't own their own homes. They were either in private rented accommodation or in social housing. 5 out of the 7 users had never had any engagement with the planning system previously at all. So that was good set of people to test with. And we tested with 1 resident who was from a BME background. The first thing that we tested was a current state, a prototype that was kind of sort of akin to the current state. So we took the technical language of the planning system, and we took the information provided in a site notice, which might have been 2-3 pages of text, and we turned it into something like this, what you can see on the right. So we used a clearer layout and an image, and we also had a simple call to action for giving feedback. So you just click that button. What we were testing with this prototype is, if we lay it out better, can people understand the site notice? And we found that while it was helpful to see it in this way, people still struggled to understand what was going on. So this, like, first one user said, I still don't know what's being built, and several users were really confused about, what is this thing, this mixed redevelopment? I don't know what that means. So basically we proved that, like, language, using simple plain language is important. And also the simple call to action, while this was helpful, lots of users still didn't know what feedback to give. So this resident said, I'm not sure what it's asking. Maybe there should be some questions. I wouldn't know what feedback to give. So if you just say, can we have your feedback? For most people, they're like, well, what do you want me to say? Prototype 2, so we tested a newer design with like a kind of modern look and feel, and also some plain speaking language. And we also tested a section, a how this affects you section with impact measures, which you can see again on the right here. And so what we found from this testing is that users can understand the simple language better, and that they liked being able to see what was built. So lots of people liked these images, even though we're not sure of like how possible it's going to be to display images like this in the current state, because a lot of developments don't have this kind of imagery. It was like, it did kind of help users like think, like visualize what is going to be built. But something that came out really strongly in the interviews is that lots of people were still really skeptical of the information. So you can see this quote here from somebody saying, people have become very disillusioned because Camden are sneaky and they withhold information. And this goes a long way to saying, we are being transparent. We're telling you what to expect, but I don't trust these numbers. I think they're a lie. So even when information is presented well, there's still going to be some work to do in terms of building trust, and trust is still a big problem around engagement. So there's only so far that a product like a digital site notice is going to go to improving trust. And then also we were testing the impact measures. So we've proved our hypothesis or our assumption that residents do care about impact measures, because it makes the changes of the building relevant to their lives. And the measures were most useful when they were communicating the change in terms that people understood. So you can see here from the example, I care about transport, are allowing it to get everywhere. So the user was interested in transport and she was clicking on this information. But then it says, what does 400 more tube journeys mean? I don't know what it is now. So they need to see like what the change is and like relevant to now. So how much is that going to affect me? So we still need to do a little bit more work on the data and how we communicate those metrics. Prototype 3 was a structured feedback form. We gave users a range of ways to respond, and this actually turned out to be really valuable because some users like gravitated towards the text box, how we could do better. Some users preferred to just like give a sentiment, like an idea of their sentiment, like the slidey thumb diagram. So yeah, this is important to engage a range of users. And also users with less knowledge of the planning system were more comfortable with the lighter touch feedback mechanisms at the top. So they were quite happy to like sort of click the buttons, but they still weren't exactly sure like what they might write in an open text comment. We also tested an interactive impact, an interactive interface, which enabled users to click on the different impact metrics that they care about. So you can see on in this diagram here, somebody could click on affordability and then it would take them to the affordability information, and there would be a specific tailored feedback form for that area, for that like topic. And so the one on the far right of the screen is showing community services. So it was showing that the development would be investing 4.5 million in community services, and then there was a question there about what would you like us to spend the money on. And so what we found through this is that users did like being able to choose and engage with the feedback separately. Choose and engage with the feedback separately on the areas that interested them. So this quote, I'd like to give feedback on the things I care about, like transport and green space. It's good to be able to ask more details. But also, we learned that there's opportunity for the planning authority to save resources by making use of the site notices to consult on other areas like the community infrastructure levy. So we have a quote here from a planning officer just saying, rather than going out and doing another whole separate consultation for SIL funding, we could just ask them here already while we have them engaged. So I think a recommendation that we might make here is that authorities could look to map the consultation needs across the planning system and think about how they can be consolidated so that we're not always asking the same residents, the different questions at different times. And you think, while this resident's here, how can I maximise their input? And it should prevent kind of consultation fatigue. And the final thing that we tested was a thanks for feedback. So this was an explainer that was telling users how their feedback would be used, and also a diagram explaining the planning process. And what we learned from testing this is that information on the planning process does confuse people. So we will need to be really careful about how this is communicated. Users also expected to see this information earlier in their journey before they gave feedback, so they knew like the context of what the feedback was that they were giving. But yeah, so what I think you can see in this version that we tested, we're still using planning terms. So we've got the process as plan making, pre-application, application, and post-application. But what users really want to know is, when is the decision being made? Has the planning been granted? When is that happening? Where is my feedback in relation to that decision? So lots of people were looking at this and thinking that because it was application stage that the decision had already been made. So lots of people were a bit annoyed that it looked like we were asking for their feedback after. But we just need to consider how we communicate that relevant to what the user is inputting on. And then the final thing was that, telling residents how their feedback will be used is a good way to build trust. But planning authorities do really need to ensure that they can run this service. If we're going to start asking residents for feedback, we need to sort the kind of back office out as well and make sure that we can use that feedback and that we keep residents updated. So you can see this final quote here is, how could we do better? This creates goodwill. We're listening. It's very constructive and productive if they actually reply. So we do need to make sure that if we ask for residents' feedback, that we use it and we tell them how we did that.
Cool. Okay. So these are the updated designs. We're showing it on a phone because it'll be a website. It's not an app, but we're showing it on a phone because most people will be accessing it on their phones. So this is the most realistic kind of way that people will be seeing it. So we start with this homepage, and it just tells you that you can find planning applications, and you can either enter your postcode or find your location automatically. Just went on too far. So then it will show you some developments near you, and clicking on one of those will highlight it. You can also use a list view. So it's like an alternative way of showing it. It will show the developments in distance order. It will be a list rather than a map for people who can't interact with a map quite as easily. And then clicking on development will take you through to the overview page. So you can see we've got much clearer language about what this is, rather than saying mixed development or mixed redevelopment. It explains what it is. It has the address, it has a map, and it's highlighted where the development is. We then have some introduction to the development about what's happening, and also the construction dates, so when the work will start and how long it will take, because we found that was something that people were interested in. And then we have the impact broken down. So here we've got green space, new homes, office space and transport. There are more categories, but these are the ones that we've chosen on here. And then we have where we are in the process. We pulled it through to this page because we thought rather than having it right at the end of the feedback process, you'd want it on the overview. And then there's also more detail. So you could read the local plan, you can see all the application documents if you really want to get into all the data, and there'll be some useful links as well. So links to other things about planning in Camden. So if you click on one of the impact measures, that then takes you through and gives you a bit more information. So here we're saying it's going to have a positive impact. There'll be 2 new public gardens, there'll be trees planted, and there'll be also an increase in CO2 emissions. And then you can start to give your feedback. So we've just given an introduction about what the feedback, what we'll do with your feedback. And then if you click through, we get this broken down, this kind of structured feedback. So first, some sentiment analysis. What do you think? How do you feel? With some happy or sad faces there. And then you get some feedback about what other people have also said. And then you can leave some text comments if you want to give some more detailed feedback, but that's optional, so you can skip it as well. And then once you've sent that, then you get the thank you page. You can subscribe to updates via email, so you can find out when things change. You can see what people thought about this particular impact. So this was green space. So you can see what everyone said. So 64% of people thought that it sounds good. 6% of people have concerns, for example, and also the sentiment feedback, so like how happy people were. And then there's a share link as well to share with your community, and your so that will copy a link that you can then share to share with friends or on WhatsApp groups or on Facebook. And yeah, so then that would then take you back through to the overview page. We're still working on some of these flows, and there's also a share link on every page at the top, so you can share it at any point as well. And we'll probably make that a bit clearer of a label. But yeah, that's the designs as they are. As I say, we're iterating them at the moment and adding, working on the flows to make sure it flows all together and that you can get the information you need. There you are.
Cool. So the playbook, we've had a number of like discussions. We had a couple of workshops to try and work out exactly what needs to go into the playbook and the different taxonomies. So the kind of information, the kind of data that we would likely need to go into a playbook. And I think the last time that we spoke in the previous show and tell, I think we talked about using Airtable, but I just wanted to show you this. So this is not the front end of the playbook, but this is what we're using as kind of the back end where all the data goes. So this is if you're not familiar with Airtable, it's kind of like a fancy spreadsheet that lives online, which allows you to do lots of different things with it. So you can enter information into it and then present it in different ways. Or you can just take this entire thing that you can see here and embed it onto any old web page, which is what we were initially trying to do. But I'll come on to what we've ended up doing in a second. But as you can see, I'll just very briefly go through. These are the fields that we kind of agreed would go in here. So we have things like the title of a resource. We now have an image field, which is slightly new and not especially important, as you can see by that image, but it could be, and it might look nice, but we'll see in a second. Then we have this idea of an objective. So we have these three things: either learn, implement, or advocate. So we would assign each resource one of these three things, and that would provide a route into searching and filtering the resources. And then we have collections, and you can see the way that Airtable works. If I click on here, these are the four that we've chosen: guide, tool, template, or case study. And then every time you add a new resource to the kind of the database, to the Airtable, and you choose which one of those it is. We have engagement type, we have audience, planning stage. I think this is kind of resource requirements. So I guess it's how challenging it is to use or to pick up. Then we have a link. So this is an important part because this is actually sending people to the resource. So if this is a tool, something like commonplace, then you would put the link here for commonplace. It'll be on this list somewhere, and that means that we will send people directly to it. In the same way, this could be a blog post or a document, even on a drive, like a public document that you could send people to. So this link is actually sending people to the content. We also have a summary field, kind of up for discussion whether we need the summary field, because there are lots of different ways that you could write one, and trying to get consistency might be a challenge. But we still have this on the list here. So this is kind of the back end, and we do need to, at this point, we do need to like add more content. If I flip over to a different tab. So this is what we're using for what we would call the front end. So this is the actual playbook, I guess. And all that data is hidden, and you can't see it in that form. It's just displayed, not hidden, it's just displayed in a different way down here, but I'll come on to that. So we felt like we should try and put this kind of front end, make it look like something that's more like a website, to help engage people and to try and provide a bit of explanation as to what the playbook is. And we're working on this and iterating on it based on the testing later this week. But this is what people see when they come to the playbook at the moment. There's a bit of an introduction as to what it is. And then you can either go straight down to searching the resources, or you can add a resource of your own. This is something that I think Harriet mentioned earlier, but we think that this is potentially quite an important part of it, the idea that people can come and contribute to it, so it feels like it's more of a community playbook, something that is evolving and almost like a working document or working website that is kind of living and breathing as opposed to just staying static. If I scroll down, these are the three objectives that we talked about earlier on. So we pulled these out as a way of trying to explain how they might be as routes into the playbook and the resources. And then down here, this is kind of the playbook itself, I guess. Everything that you saw in the Airtable that I just showed is powering this here. So these are all the resources, this list, as you can see. You can filter through Learn, Implement, or Advocate, which we've already talked about. So if I click on Learn, you'll see this will jiggle around and reshape itself. If you want to learn and implement, you can do that. So you can choose more than one filter at any given time and then turn them off, as you can see. And then on the left-hand side here, we've got resource types. So if you just want to look for tools, you can click on Tools, and you can see Commonplace is down here, which I mentioned earlier, and lots of other tools too. This is where the image is being pulled in. As you can see, like I said, not a particularly essential piece of content, but it does make it look slightly nicer and may help for people like recognize a logo. Filter via engagement type. So if you're looking for tools that were just useful for example, consulting, then you can do that, and it will change. Or if you want tools that are just for engaging with a particular audience, so it could be, I don't know, older people. It's a filter. I'm explaining a filter on the internet. I'm sure most of you are aware of them, but just to say that you can use more than one at any given time and kind of filter away until your heart's content. But obviously, as this gets bigger and bigger, it could be that you just want to come back, oh, I saw that thing on the playbook and I want to find it again. So you can just search for a resource. So if you knew that you wanted to find Commonplace, you could type and then it would appear like that. If you click on one of these, it does open up slightly, and you get the summary that we talked about earlier on. You can also see that it has underneath it the stages of the planning process. They're not clickable, but you can see that that's where we think they're involved in. This information might not be completely accurate because I put some of this in, but you get the gist. And obviously over here you've got the tag to show that it's a tool. And this link here is the link that I mentioned in the Airtable earlier. So if I click on this, then it won't do anything, but if it was live, then it would take you to Commonplace or wherever you'd put in. And then just further on down, we've got an area here where you can, if you wanted to, you could run like a newsletter. So you could send people updates if you wanted to try and keep that community aspect to it. So you could let people know every time there was like something new, or just like run a monthly newsletter, that kind of thing. And then down here, if people have questions, if they want some basic guidance on how to use it or what this all means, you can use this. And this is like an accordion that works like that. And then the opportunity to just share feedback, and then a lovely footer. If we go back to the top very quickly, you click on Add a Resource. One of the great things about Airtable is that you can, it comes with a form. So this form, which takes a little while to load because it's pulling the information from Airtable, but basically this is directly connected to the data, so the Airtable I showed you. So if I was to type in all this information here, give it a title, choose an objective, choose whether it's a tool, you can choose more than one, etc. All of this information here, as soon as I click submit, will then automatically, at the moment, unless we decide to put some sort of moderating process, but at the moment it would automatically populate the playbook and appear there directly. Oh, I guess I put some in the form, and it would automatically just get added to the resource.
What we were looking to test was what were officers trying to achieve when they came to the playbook, and when they saw that page that Ian went through. Were the resources that they were trying to find there or not, and why were they trying to find certain things? For people from lower maturity councils where planning engagement may not have been as much of a thing, were there particular needs or barriers to implementing digital engagement tools that we hadn't accounted for as part of the playbook? What filters did people gravitate towards, and why? And did we have that hierarchy of information and structure right with the different categories? And is a particular incentive needed to contribute to the playbook? And why would people want to contribute? And do they see this as a collaborative thing? So we tested with a handful of local authorities, 5 local authorities. 3 were from urban areas, 2 were rural, And then we had a range of different officers. So there were strategic planning officers who were more policy focused, community engagement officers, and then planning officers, as well as people that were more from across different teams looking at digital infrastructure from a range of district, borough, city, and unitary councils. Firstly, if you remember the Learn, Implement, Advocate, so we found that there's an opportunity for the playbook to play a role in supporting local authorities in advocating for planning engagement by providing advice and guidance around this particular aspect. So some quotes there: using the playbook to build a case for change for engagement, that would be really useful, including buyers guides and business cases is a really great idea. Someone also said the advocate part needs to be more guided around some of the problems and issues that you need to resolve. So we're thinking about how we can update that to include some more guidance. We learned that context is really critical when people are looking for resources, and that includes geography, council type, and also what stage you're at in the planning process. So one of the strategic planning officers said it would be really useful to search geographically. As a London borough, I want to compare with other London boroughs to be able to see challenges and issues. The ability to filter by audience we found was really valuable and one of the most valuable filters when planning engagement activities, and officers want to understand how others have reached certain groups by looking into this information. So yeah, classification of audience is really good. I would look for guides on ethics around engagement and how to target different groups. We learnt that users gravitate to tools and case studies first and foremost, and they want to know how engagement tools can be applied to solve a problem. So what are their core features and the pros and cons? So as you saw in the demo at the moment, the information in there is quite light. I think what it's missing is like, what do they actually do? So how can we pull that out more? It's always interesting to see what worked well and what didn't, to hear stories from others. So yeah, those case studies are really critical. Some users were concerned who would have access or could contribute to the playbook and questioned how it would be monitored and maintained. So there's a question around, like, would everyone have access to this? Would Commonplace come here and be able to upload their own stuff? Would it be made public? And I think a point in this as well is we need to consider the constraints around maintaining this and monitoring it. So if you know, Camden's taking this on, how can we simplify the design so that it's actually something that's usable and that can be updated quite simply, rather than trying to put everything in it where it then becomes a bit too unwieldy. Simple context structure is best, otherwise users can find the information overwhelming and confusing. So someone said there's too many different options is overwhelming. The engagement type filter is quite complex, possibly not needed. Someone else said I would use a search bar to find what I was looking for. It's easy to type in local planning and find stuff that way. And finally, as Nora said at the beginning, we were really pleased to hear that there was a willingness from across the board from users to contribute their own resources. And we need to think about how we can help people create good content. So having a structure around case studies would be helpful so they're consistent and it's clear what the main takeaways are, was what one of the community engagement officers said. We think there needs to be clear articulation of the purpose and audience of the playbook and how it is designed to be used, on the playbook page. We're looking to simplify it so we can take into account constraints around Camden's capacity to manage it. You might have noticed there's some stuff in there, but there's quite a lot of gaps. So doing a content drive to add resources to fill out the content and make it rich and useful. Continue to test this, including guidelines around case studies and digital tools. And then further consideration of how it will be maintained and monitored, and who has access to it, as well as the right tools to use for a front end going forward. I think Airtable and software are working well for the moment, but it might be that this changes or expands in the future.
So coming up for our last sprint, we are finishing off the design flows. As I mentioned earlier, we're looking at like any dead ends, and just how we can make that prototype flow better. We're looking into how we can make the designs feasible. So I had a call with Sidip from Camden earlier this week to talk about data, and he was really keen to understand what we would need to do to get that data, what changes we need to make to the process of like submitting applications to get that data in a structured format. So that's something we're looking at. We're also looking at creating a MVP version of the design where it's actually just using the data that's available now with minimal changes. And we're going to write up a summary deck of what we learned and recommended next steps. Oh, and we're also going to talk to Digital Land as well about some of that data stuff. And on the Playbook front, we are iterating the Airtable and the softer front end that Ian just demoed based on the user feedback, writing details into how to take the Playbook forward and develop it, and writing guidance around tools and case studies.
These are our contact details. And any more questions, comments before we finish up?
I was just going to say one thing about the next steps of the Playbook, which is that what the kind of biggest constraint is going to be the resource requirement from Camden to manage this thing. The benefit of all the testing that we've done is that we've demonstrated the value of lots of the different filters, and particularly the learn, implement, advocate section, which was really testing the purpose of the Playbook and what kind of content people would expect to find when they come here. So we know that all three are valuable, but we're probably only going to be able to deliver one like in the next phase of development. So yeah, just that it will be quite scaled back to make sure that we can actually use and manage the thing.
No more questions? Thanks very much, everyone, for your participation. And I don't know whether the next show and tell is in the diary yet, but it'll be the 10th of March when we'll do a wrap up.